Hello, seventh graders. Uh, I just wanted to follow up on the correspondences from Crestwood about moving forward and participation and grades. Seventh and eighth, for the remainder of the year, participation will remain voluntary, and you will receive. It looks like, I believe, a pass fail for participation, meaning if you participate even a little, you pass. And pass, I believe, will show up on your report card as an A. So it could be the best, easiest A you ever got by simply participating, moving from this point forward. So you really can't go wrong if you participate at all in the assignments. Then it'll be an easy A. 9th through 12th is mandatory. You do have to, because there's some different rules for high school and laws out there. So 9th through 12th will be mandatory. They will also be pass-fail, but there will be mandatory. So a little bit different for you. If you hear people talking about if it's mandatory for them, it is if they're in 9th through 12th grade. Yours is still voluntary, but we do have to give you something on your report card. So that would be a pass-fail. So basically, participate even just once or so a week, and you'll pass no problem. All right, as promised today, genetics, fun stuff. All right, let's go for it here. All right, it all starts with this handsome fellow right here. No, now he's gone. That handsome fellow right there. That's Gregor Mendel. And he was a lot of things: a monk, a botanist, part-time scientist, gardener, master gardener. He had a great garden outside his monastery. He taught, and he really spent lots of time in his garden. And he started to notice something interesting when it came to his pea plants. And I'm going to bring up a picture here. He noticed there was variations in the pea plants. Some of the seeds were round. Some of the seeds were wrinkled. When you opened up the little pod here, some of the pea seeds were round, some were wrinkled. Some had a yellow center, some had a green. Some of these pea plants had a white flower, and some had a violetish red, purpley flower. On the pod itself, he called it a full form. Others were constricted, like the pea pod had little bumps in between each seed. Some of the pods were yellow, some were green. Some of the positions, like at the end here, he called it axial, which means it was sort of like a spoke in a wheel. There was an end to the branch, and then these branches sort of went around it. And some of them, the flowers were at the end. It just sort of terminated right here. It wasn't axial, like in a circle. And some of the pea plants were long and tall, and some of them were short. And he thought, okay, this is interesting. And he was a monk. He was a man of faith, and he taught about religion. And so part of him was like, well, that's the way God wanted these plants. But I think maybe some of it was like, God can't be sitting there going, okay, this pea pod's going to be yellow, this one's going to be green, I'm going to make this one purple. I think he was thinking something along the lines of, I think God is out there determining the color, or if every pea in the world is going to be round or wrinkled. I think he believes he set something in place, but there was something else at work. So he started to do some experiments on genetics, and he would deliberately cross-pollinate two pea plants. And he did this for thousands of pea plants. There's documents of him upwards of 10,000 pea plants, doing then hundreds of thousands of samples over the course of about 8 years. And he found some very interesting things. And then he started to name and scientifically calculate what was going to happen. Because in the beginning, he took a pea plant that had yellow pods, and he crossed it with another plant that had yellow pods. And the offspring of those two pea plants would get yellow pods. Nothing surprising there. He figured I took some of the information from each of them. Let's say the mom plant and the dad plant. They both had yellow pods. The offspring, the baby pea plants, all had yellow pods. So he would repeat that as a good scientist would, and he would take a yellow pod plant mom and a yellow pod plant dad, and he would cross them, put pollen from one into the other, and he would get offspring with green colored pods. He's like, well, what's up with that? What's going on there? And he noticed that with other things, too, other traits. Take a white flowered pea plant and another white flowered pea plant, and he would get offspring with white flowers. Sometimes he would take a white flowered pea plant, cross it with another white flowered pea plant, and get this violet red flower. It just didn't make sense. And the opposite. He would cross two of these, sometimes get a violet red purple flower, sometimes he would get a white flower. So he knew something was going on. So over thousands of experiments, he finally figured it out. And he is considered the father of modern genetics. Now, this is a very simple version. This is called Mendelian genetics. And it gets more complicated, and we'll do some more complicated things. But this was the beginning. And it's nice to start there because it is simple. It's kind of like on, off, there, not there. It does get more complicated, but this is the basics of it. This is what Mendel started with. This was started all of us with the study. So going to our website, we have some words on here we're going to want to get familiar with, okay? First one is genetics, and genetics is the study of heredity. If you're a geneticist, you study genetics, you study heredity. Okay, what is heredity? Heredity is the passing of traits from one parent to an offspring. And they could be people, or they could be puppies, or they could be salmon, or they could be pea plants. When we say parent, that is a parent plant and another parent plant, or a parent kangaroo, a mom and a dad kangaroo, one plant and another, one fish and another, one bird and another. Their genetics that make them up being passed down to whatever offspring, either one offspring or 15 offspring. If you have two dogs and the mother has a litter of 8 puppies, you're studying the genetics is the study of the heredity of passing down genetic information from both the mom dog and the dad dog to all those puppies. Okay? And it's same for you with people. What is a trait? Passing on of traits. If we're studying genetics, the heredity of passing down traits, what are traits? And we'll find traits. I should have gone the other way, I'm sure, because that's how that works. Well, you get a little tour of all the words. Let's start over. And traits is the first one. A trait, a physical characteristic of the organism. Okay? So in Mendel's case, the green pea pod, the yellow pod, full inflated, not constricted pod, whether it's tall or short. In our puppies, long hair, short hair, long snout, short snout, white on its paws, not white on its paws. In you, your blue eyes, your hazel eyes, your deep voice, or your fingernail length and shape. If it's a salmon, how many scales, the color of it, the shape of its tail. Those are all traits. It's a physical characteristics, not something you necessarily can't see. It's usually a physical characteristic that you can observe, even if it's your hands. Does it have a rough or finish or a smooth? If you're looking at a horse, the shape of its hooves. If you listen to a cat, it's sound of its meow. It's a physical characteristic of an organism. That's what a trait is. All right. Okay. Some terms you're going to hear. Purebred. And you've heard this with with animals, maybe with a dog, a purebred dog, a purebred cat, a purebred horse. That's an organism with only one form of a trait, and offspring only have that trait. So here's a purebred flower situation. Guess it's not. We'll make it. There's, let's say, curly leaves, curly petals, short green leaves, purple color, green color. That's what mom plant has. That's what dad plant has. That's it. It's a purebred. They have no other traits. All of their offspring have those exact same traits. That's why a purebred dog is more expensive, because let's say you're looking at a purebred German Shepherd, it has only German Shepherd traits to it. There's no poodle or Cocker Spaniel genetics in there that could give it curly hair or a shorter size. Purebred means it only has genetics. It only has traits from that breed, from that on. And if you cross it with another purebred, you're only going to get offspring that have those traits. There's no other traits mixed in from a different organism. Okay? That's a purebred. All right. Another word for purebred. Let's not go with that yet. Let's go back. I don't want to get too confusing. All right. So what Mendel didn't know he was dealing with is he was dealing with genes. When it came to the color of the pod, the shape of the leaf, whether that pea plant was tall or short, he was combining different genes of the DNA from the mom plant and the dad plant. A gene is part of that DNA, that whole DNA that controls that trait. In that whole double helix, only part of it controls the color of the pod. Only part of it controls the color of the petals. Part of it controls your eye color. Not the whole DNA, but just this section right here. Okay, so genes from one plant and genes from the other would come together. So you had information on pod color, or whether the seed was wrinkled or not, from mom and some from dad. Genes from both. We're like, okay, well, whose gene wins out? If we have dad plant saying it should be a yellow pod and mom plant's genes saying it should be a green pod, well, who wins? Do they fight it out? Even from your parents, you may have gotten genes from mom that said our child should have blue eyes, and genes from your mom's side that says no, they should have green eyes. Well, who determines who wins that battle? And that's what we're going to be getting into. Okay. So there are what's called alleles. This is pronounced allele. And they are forms of a gene. And they can either be dominant or recessive. And that is what controls the inheritance of a trait. So in this case, we've set up what's called a Punnett square. And a Punnett square is used to determine what trait is going to get passed down from one generation to another. And what we have here is a Punnett square set up with dominant and recessive alleles. An allele, remember, okay, it's a form of a gene. So this looks like it's set up to determine whether the seed is going to be either yellow or green. Okay, that's what the Punnett square is. It's a way to figure out the probability of whether the dominant allele, and when we say dominant allele, that is a trait that will show up. It's dominant. It will show up if it's present. Okay? So we'll get into this. It's a little confusing. It's okay. If the dominant allele is there, it wins the argument over the other gene. Okay? So we have forms of genes, And let's say it's green pod, yellow pod. This is from the dad plant. This is from the mom plant. And that's green and yellow. If the green gene is dominant, it will win that battle and the offspring will have green pods. If the yellow trait is dominant, even though they're both there, this one will cover this one and the yellow pod will show up. The dominant trait shows up. The other type of trait is a recessive allele. If it's recessive, it will only show up if there's no dominant one there. Okay? And the way we show dominance in recessive is with capital and lowercase letters. Okay? This is my dominant, and this is my recessive. Dominant and recessive. And it's shown there what's called a Punnett square. And a Punnett square is a chart that shows all the possible combinations of alleles that could result from a genetic crossing. Okay, remember, allele is a form of the gene, either dominant or recessive. That's what we're talking about first. Very simple. You can put those in a Punnett square, and it will tell you your probability of what your offspring will have. So let's do one, and maybe it'll make it more clear. All right. Here we go. Lower lunch. And we'll let this load up. And we're going to take two plants, pea plants. We'll pretend we're Mendel. And we're going to cross them. And we're going to keep track of the genetic alleles. Then we got to go through all our meiosis stuff. Okay. So let's put a Punnett square in here. All right, this is a Punnett square. And we're going to do some genetics, which is the study of the heredity. And that is the passing down of genetic information from a mom and a dad. All right, so here are our alleles. Let's see if we can make this bigger. Okay, the trait we are going to, though, form is let's do the, let's do height of the pea plant. Let's do height. The height. That's what we're going to, the trait, the physical trait we are going to track is the height of our pea plants. Okay? All right. That's our height. And let's say that the trait height, we're going to say for height, the height, tall is dominant. That is the dominant trait. Okay. And we'll make that, we'll say capital T. Capital T is going to represent the allele. Remember, allele is the form of a gene. You could have either tall or short. In pea plants, there's not really medium. That's what's nice about them. They have very distinct, either the pea plants are tall or the pea plants are short. There's not like medium-sized ones. That's why pea plants are great to study genetics. It's either one or the other. Yellow, green. Not in between. It's either wrinkled or smooth. Tall or short. So, tall is dominant. We're going to represent with a capital T. So, lowercase t is going to represent the recessive allele. Short is recessive. Okay? So for our alleles, it is T, capital T, excuse me, is going to represent a tall plant, and that is dominant. Lowercase t is going to represent short plant. All right? So let's go ahead over here, and we'll put our P plants in. Okay, we're going to make this one, we'll just say, we're going to call it the mom plant on top. Okay. And the dad plant will be over here. We'll put dads over this side. All right. So there's a couple of ways that you could be tall if you were a tall plant. Tall plant. Here's the possible genotypes. A genotype is how you could be. What is your genetics to be tall? If you have gotten from your mom a capital T, meaning you got a tall, dominant gene from mom, and from your dad, you got a tall, dominant gene. Well, you got both capital T dominance, you will be tall, you will be tall. If from your mom you got a capital T dominant gene for being tall, and from your dad you inherited a lowercase t, which means from mom you got uppercase T, from dad you got lowercase t, you will still be tall. That equals tall plant. This also equals tall plant because you have one dominant and one recessive. The dominant one will take over and win. You will still be tall. Even if you have both, only the dominant one will mask, cover up the lowercase one. Here you have both tall, so you will both you can't have any choice, you will be tall. Okay? What if dad gives you a lowercase t and mom gives you a lowercase t? What's going to happen then? You will be short if you were a pea plant. This is called the genotype. What is the allele breakdown? What do you get from mom? What do you get from dad? What do you get from mom? What do you get from dad? We're talking genotype. The phenotype is the physical trait that shows up because of the genotype. My genotype, dominant, my phenotype, I'm going to be tall. My genotype, dominant, recessive, I'm still going to be tall. My phenotype will be tall because I have a dominant trait right here. What's my genotype? Recessive. My phenotype will be short because lowercase t is going to be short. Okay, so genotype is the combination. What do the alleles look like? What form of the gene do you have? That's what we mean by allele. Genotype is dominant. Then this is, you're going to be tall. Dominant recessive will still be tall because you have this dominant gene. You have at least one. If you get from mom recessive and dad recessive, little t, short, you will be short as a pea plant. Okay? This is genotype. This is phenotype. Genotype is the combination. Phenotype and phenotype. This is here. How are the genes arranged? Phenotype, what physical trait could I see based on the genotype? So let's run a Punnett square over here based on some different genotypes from mom and dad. Okay, mom plant. Let's make mom plant tall. Mom's tall. Now there's two different ways she could be tall. She could be tall because she got from her parents a big T or big T little t. Okay? Let's make mom this version. Let's make her tall, but because her genotype is capital T, lowercase t, she is still tall. This is her genotype right here. Dominant gene and a recessive gene. Dominant, recessive, dominant wins, she is tall. Let's make dad a short plant. The only way to be short is if you are little t, because if you had a big T, even just one of them, you would be tall because you would have one dominant gene. The only way you could be, if you're a pea plant, short is if you have little t. Right there. So let's run the Punnett square. You're going to get one allele from mom. Okay, mom and dad, Mendel crosses. Takes the pollen from dad, puts it on the mom plant. So in the genetics, for height, he's going to get from mom a capital T. Right here. Mom's giving her capital T here, and then from dad, lowercase t. Okay, from mom, right here, mom gives a lowercase t. Dad gives a lowercase t. Coming down this way, mom gives a capital T. Dad gives lowercase t. Dad's lowercase t. Okay. Mom gives lowercase t. Dad gives a lowercase t. And these are the offspring. The genotype is right here. And we're going to call this one 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'll put them down here. Number 1, its genotype is big T, little t. One dominant, one recessive. What's going to be the phenotype of that plant? That would be tall. Because it has one dominant allele right here. And dominant will win. It has a dominant and a recessive. And we said T, capital T, is dominant. Number 2. Little t, recessive. That is going to be a short plant. Genotype little t will get me a short pea plant. Number 3. A dominant and a recessive. Dominant, recessive. One dominant, one recessive is the genotype. I'm going to have a tall plant. One dominant, one recessive is going to get me a tall plant. 4. Recessive, little t. That is going to give me a short plant. So you can figure out the probability, and Mendel did this. If I cross mom with a capital T, lowercase t, and dad. So mom is tall and dad is short. But this is the way mom is tall. One dominant, one recessive. What's the probability of the offspring? Well, it looks like you have a 2 out of 4 chance or 1/2 chance of having tall baby plants. And that is a 50% chance. There is a 2 out of 4 chance, or 1/2, chance it's going to be short. So if you cross these two plants, you got a 50-50 chance of the offspring either being tall or short. It's not 100% for sure. You might end up with some tall ones. You might end up with some short ones. You got a 50-50 chance of what the offspring will look like. All right, that is a lot for today. We're going to go over this again tomorrow. On Wednesday, we'll meet up live and I'll answer questions about this material. But we're going to do the same thing tomorrow. All right, everybody. Enjoy your Monday.